So there was a guy in World War I. He was a part of the British Army, and his name was Patrick Fowler. And Patrick Fowler was a part of the Battle of Le Cateau in France. And he went in with his unit into this battle zone, and in the course of the battle, he was cut off from his unit. And he was cut off behind enemy lines, and so he was left there. When they retreated, he was cut off, and he stayed there behind enemy lines. He couldn't get out, and he actually spent about 5 months just hiding in the woods, trying to forage around in farmers' fields for potatoes or for carrots or whatever he could find. And he just kept himself alive just by foraging around and hiding in the woods. And after 5 months, he was actually discovered by a guy whose name was Louis Baskin. And Louis Baskin found him in the woods, and he wanted to help him, and so he decided to take him to his mother-in-law's house. His mother-in-law's name was Madame Belmont Gobert, and he took Patrick Fowler to her house, and she hid him in her house. And so they were behind enemy lines, way behind enemy lines, and so he could just, he could be in the house, he could get out just little bits of time, but he couldn't get out much. He couldn't really go out in the open, and he had to stay hidden for most of the time. After he'd been there some months in Madame Belmont Gobert's house, the German army came to the front door, knocked on the door, and said, "Hey, we want to billet 16 soldiers in your house. So we're requisitioning part of your house for these 16 German soldiers." So they had to do something with Patrick Fowler. So what are they going to do? Well, Madame Belmont Gobert had a wardrobe in her kitchen. And you could see the wardrobe here. And so what they did is they put Patrick Fowler in the wardrobe. And so while the German soldiers were billeted in this house, they were living there, Patrick Fowler lived in this wardrobe. And they would feed him through kind of a hole in the side, and he could only come out little tiny bits of time when the German soldiers were not there, and he had to hide. He spent almost all of his time in the wardrobe, in the very house where they were staying. And after another bunch of months, the army came back and said, "Listen, Madame Belmont Gobert, we're going to requisition your whole house. You need to move out of here because we're going to move more soldiers in here, and we're just going to keep the house for ourselves." And so she said, "Okay, what are we going to do?" And there was a small cottage not far from the house, so they're going to move her to that house. So she asked the German soldiers if they would help move enough of her furniture from her house to the cottage in order for her to live there, which they said yes, they would help her do. So they moved her furniture. The German soldiers moved her furniture from the house that she had been living in, or at least enough of it so she could get by, to this cottage. And a part of what they moved was the wardrobe with Patrick Fowler inside. And he spent the war in her wardrobe, essentially. He went into her wardrobe he was separated from his group and was discovered by Louis Baskin January 15th, 1915, and he was reunited with his unit October 18th, 1918. He spent essentially 4 years living in a wardrobe. Now, imagine what that was like. He's in this house. There are German soldiers there every day. He's for the big chunk of the time, he's living in a wardrobe in the kitchen where the German soldiers are coming to eat their meals. They're all around. And when they move, what would it have been like, right? He's in the wardrobe. Like, "Hey, could you guys help us move this?" I just can imagine that. Like, have you ever moved a box like it has a cat or something in it? He says, "Okay, Pat, look, we're going to move the thing. Don't jiggle around, and whatever you do, don't sneeze." I would imagine it would have been really important to get the pepper out of the wardrobe as soon as they put him in, right? We can't have you making noise. We can't have you sneezing. We can't have this thing going on. I'm trying to imagine 4 years in a wardrobe. You know that's not what he thought he was going to be doing when he joined the army, right? Now, in some ways, he actually, maybe it was a leg up. He lived through the army. He was reunited with his mates in 1918. He went back to England. He was actually from Ireland, so he moved back to Ireland. He lived with his wife and his 3 daughters, and he died at age 90. But what a journey, and how many days do you think that Patrick Fowler was thinking, "Today's the day, they're going to find me. I hope they don't look in the wardrobe." Why did they not search the wardrobe for 4 years? But they didn't. And so you can imagine there were some nights for Patrick Fowler when he thought, this is over, and God, when is this going to end? And he must have wanted at certain points along the way to just bolt, right? I'm just going to make a run for it. But he couldn't. He was too far behind enemy lines. and he survived the war, and he went back. And Madame Belmont-Gobert later received some compensation from both the British military and the French. She got some citations, some awards, and they recognized that this woman had made a really significant helping impact for the British military. And there are points of our lives when we end up in wardrobes, right? When we end up in a place where we just go, how did I get here? And where am I going to go from here? And how long is this going to last? And will it ever end? And God, where are you? Where are you in the midst of this? And in Christian, classical Christianity, this is called also the dark night of the soul. When you find yourself in this place where you don't know what the next step is and how long can you endure this? And God, what are you up to? I had an interesting opportunity this week. I was gone for the week, and I spent the first half of the week at a monastery near Portland where I'm engaged in a course of spiritual direction. So I'm learning to be a spiritual director. And then the second half of the week, I actually went and joined a couple of guys that I've known for a long time, and I helped them do a training at a women's rescue mission in the Portland area. And what we were doing there is talking, and just kind of walking through life with the staff of this women's rescue shelter. And in the process of that, we got to hang out with some of the, people who actually are going through the program there, some of the ladies who are going through the program. And in the mornings, they have a thing, they're from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, they have just a gathering. And in this gathering, they do what they call self-evaluations, where they're talking about maybe the struggles that they're in the middle of, and what's going on in their mind in the middle of that struggle, and what they believe their temptation was, and why they maybe made a mistake they did, and what they want to have happen when they, to move forward in their life and in the journey and in their program. And we heard from one lady who had been emotionally and physically and sexually abused for 39 years. I got to tell you, I have no context for that kind of pain, that kind of suffering. And that's a very different environment for me. And so even as I went in, right, I was really clear with them as I had opportunities to teach. I try not to fake it in these situations, or in any situation, really. When you're speaking to a group of people, it's like, you can fake it, but they're going to know you're not, that you're faking it. And so it was a challenging time for me. I really enjoyed it. It was really rich and deep. But I was confronted by circumstances there that I have no context for. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it would be like to believe that to have your father abuse you in all those ways, and to have your mother be a part of that and help, and ultimately to run off and literally join the circus and the carnival and live that life where you're just used by people your whole life. I just don't know what that would be like. But it has to be a dark night, don't you think? Days when you say, what's the next step for me, God? What's going on? And so it's really a challenging environment to say, hey, God's faithful and all things work together for good in the end. To someone who's been through, I want to be really careful with people's emotions and their hearts in those moments, because I don't have a context for what they're going through, and I am not going to pretend that I do. But we all come to these places in life where we hit what Peter Scazzaro says in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is the wall. This wall where we just go, I don't know how I got here. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the end of the road is. I don't know where you are, God. I don't hear you. I don't sense you. I don't feel you from anything that's going on around me, and I just don't know when this is going to end. That's the dark night of the soul. That's the wall that Scazzaro talks about in his book. And this is how he describes it. He says this: for most of us, the wall appears through a crisis that turns our world upside down. It comes perhaps through a divorce, a job loss, the death of a close friend or family member, a cancer diagnosis, a disillusioning church experience, a betrayal, a shattered dream, a wayward child, a car accident, an inability to get pregnant, a deep desire to marry that remains unfulfilled, a spiritual dryness and loss of joy in our relationship with God. And so we question ourselves in those moments. We question God. We question the church. We discover for the first time that our faith doesn't appear to work. You've been there before? When you go, this isn't working. And it's not working. We have more questions than answers, as the very foundation of our faith feels like it is on the line. We don't know where God is, what he's doing, where he's going, how he's getting us there, or when this will be over. it is not simply a one-time event either that we pass through and get beyond. It appears to be something we return to as part of our ongoing relationship with God. And the likelihood is if you've been following Jesus for very long, you've been to the wall. You've been to those moments in your life where you go, I'm out of gas. I don't know where it's going from here. I don't know any of the answers, God. I don't know where you're going. I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know what you're doing with me. And that's a really challenging place to be. And so as we look at this idea, we're going to study for a few minutes the life of Abraham and what Abraham went through and how his life unfolded. And we know that we see the story of Abraham in Genesis. It begins in chapter 12, but I'm going to scoot ahead to the end of the story, Genesis chapter 22. So if you have your Bible, turn there and follow along. Genesis chapter 22. I'm going to start in verse 1 and read through verse 14. This is the end of Abraham's life, mostly. That at least this is pretty much the end of it in the story. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkeys, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hands the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said to him, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they both went on together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and he took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord Will Provide, as it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord shall it be provided. One of the things that strikes me about this story is the nonchalance with which the story is told. God says, Abraham, take your son. And he makes this point a couple of times, your only son. And take him to a mountain I'm going to show you and sacrifice him there. Then it says that Abraham got up the next morning, saddled up his donkeys, grabbed a couple of servants who didn't appear to be busy, and headed for the mountain. He got the wood, he got the knife, he got the fire. He went off. They come to the place where he sees the mountain from afar, and he says to the servants, you guys wait here. Isaac and I are going to go. We'll be back. As they're headed up the mountain, Isaac says, hey, Dad, I see the fire, I see the knife, I see the wood. What I don't see is the lamb to be sacrificed. And Abraham says to him, don't worry about that. God will provide it. And so we have this story. Do you ever wonder what's going on in Abraham's mind at this point? Really? I mean, what's going on in Isaac's mind? This is a significantly interesting story, but it's out of the norm. God is asking Abraham to do some stuff here that doesn't make any sense to any of us. It doesn't make sense to Abraham. It doesn't make sense to Isaac. It doesn't make sense probably to the young men. Maybe they don't know anything that's going on. And so we can read this story and say, wow, Abraham was the father of the faithful, because when he was asked to sacrifice even his own son, he just did it. What I want us to know, though, is that while Abraham's called the father of the faithful, remember, this is the end of the story. This isn't the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is that God invites Abraham to a journey of faith, and it is not a short journey. You remember where it starts. Back in Genesis chapter 12, and you can flip back there if you want, and I'll kind of lead us through this. But Abraham's story begins kind of in Genesis chapter 12, where we meet him in Haran. And God says to Abraham, I want you to take your family and I want you to go to a land that I will show you. And I will make your name great, and I will bless you, and you will become a blessing to all the nations. That's Genesis 12, 1 through 3. I want you to go to this land that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to make your family's going to multiply, and I'm going to bless you, and you are going to become a blessing to all the nations on earth. And so Abraham goes. He's then Abram, right? He's called as Abram. Sarah's name is Sarai. They take off, and they move along the way. And there's some parts of their journey that we learn about. Then we get to Genesis 15, and it's been a while since Abraham heard the call, right? And he's thinking that it's not going to work. He's thinking that God isn't going to show up. And in Genesis chapter 15, 1 through 6, we get this part of the story where Abraham comes back to God, and he says, what will you give me as I continue childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, behold, you've given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward the heaven and the number of stars, if you are able to number them. And then he said, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord and counted it to him as righteousness. Right, he comes to this place. He hits the wall. Like, okay, Lord, you gave me this promise. You said go and do this thing, and you'll meet me, and you're going to give me kids, and my kids will outnumber the stars in heaven, and I'm going to bless every nation on earth will be blessed through my life, and here I am. Here we are. We've journeyed this distance. We're still childless. The only heir of it's going to be Eliezer of Damascus. What are we going to do? And God says, no, it's not going to be Eliezer. It'll be your own son, and so hang in there. That's Abraham's story. Then in Genesis chapter 17, we find Abraham again. Now he's 99 years old. It's been almost 25 years. It's been 24 years since God originally called Abraham. And it says that God said to Abram in Genesis chapter 17, verses 15 through 18. Again, Abraham's questioning, God, where are you? When are you going to show up? What's going to happen? How is this going to work? I've got some ideas, by the way. Genesis 17:15. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Now, we'll talk a little more about Ishmael in a minute, but remember, Abraham and Sarah take on themselves the role of figuring out this heir. They decide how they're going to do it, and Ishmael is the product of that decision. And Abraham here, when God comes to him and says, okay, now this thing's going to come to pass, and he says, really? I'm 99 years old. It's been 25 years since you. What about let's just let Ishmael be could Ishmael live before you? And God says, no, that wasn't his plan. Ishmael wasn't his plan. And so they're incredulous. Now in Genesis 18, we hear in verses 9 through 12 that God makes this promise. They said to him, where's Sarah, your wife? And he said, she's in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old. Abraham at this point is about 100. Sarah is about 90. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with her. You follow that? She was beyond childbearing at this point. Like it wasn't going to happen. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I'm worn out, and my Lord is old? Shall I have the pleasure of a child? Really? Like, are you serious? This is not how it works. I mean, Abraham and Sarah are looking at each other and saying, this isn't even actually physically possible. Sarah's beyond childbearing years. And yet, she becomes pregnant. And in Genesis chapter 21, Isaac is born just as God had said, and they named him Isaac. Sarah's 90 years old, and Abraham is 100 years old. It's been 25 years since God called them. This hasn't been a quick journey, nor has it been an easy journey. And there have been a lot of roadblocks and a lot of difficult things along the way. Isaac is probably 15 at this point when we get to Genesis 22 and God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. This is another roadblock. So now we're in Genesis chapter 2. Isaac is 15 years old. Sarah's maybe 105 and Abraham's 115. But the journey to the mountain to sacrifice Isaac is not Abraham's first test, right? We've seen roadblocks already along the way. There have been many things that he's faced along the way. And so if you think about what are the walls that Abraham hit? What were the moments for him when you know he was saying, really, Lord, I don't really see what you're doing. I don't think I get it. I don't understand where you are, where you're going, why this hasn't happened for me yet. You made me this promise, but now it hasn't occurred. I mean, the first roadblock I think of is that God asked him to go to a foreign country. Okay, Abraham's 75 years old. There aren't that many of us in this room who are 75 years old, right? I mean, he's lived his life out a long ways. Now, people lived older then, maybe, but still, he's 75 years old. He's established in his land. He likes it there. It doesn't seem like there's any reason to go. But God says, no, you're going to go. So the first roadblock is, God, really? What are you up to? And what are you doing? But he goes. This looks like a big roadblock. Turns out it's probably the smallest one. There are some other roadblocks that he hits. Remember in Genesis chapter 12 where they go to Egypt and they run into Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and Abraham says to Sarai, hey, don't tell anyone you're my wife because they'll kill me and take you. Just tell them you're my sister. Let's lie to them. And so they do that. It's another matter of faith, right? Don't tell them the truth, because if you tell them the truth, they'll kill me and they'll take you. The next roadblock that I think we can see in Abraham and Sarah's journey is the Ishmael. They come to this place where they say, look, we don't know how to solve this. We don't think God's going to show up. Let's fix this on our own. That's where Ishmael comes from. Let's fix this on our own. We're going to dive in here. We're going to sort this all out. And it's Sarah's idea, right? She says to Abram, hey, this is not working. Take Hagar, my wife, and maybe we can have a son through her. So he does take Hagar, and she conceives, and immediately Sarah's bitter, and the whole thing falls apart, which is how that sort of thing would happen, isn't it? It's a mess, and it doesn't work, and they end up sending Hagar and Ishmael away. Let's fix this on our own. We're in the midst of this difficult thing. We don't know what the journey is. We don't know what the road is. We don't know how to get out of this. We don't know how God's going to come through on his promise. Let's short circuit God's plan, and we'll do it this way. And maybe God will bless it. It doesn't happen. I think it's a roadblock that they lose Ishmael. Because Abraham, he at least has a son. And later on he says, oh, that Ishmael could live before you as my son. And God says, no, it's not going to be the way it is. That's not what I have in mind. And so I think that losing Ishmael is another really challenging moment for Abram. But certainly sacrificing Isaac. What questions did Abraham have as he walked up the mountain? What did he wonder about? What do you wonder about? That God would tell one of his leading patriarchs, kill your own son. It's human sacrifice. And Abraham listens, and he goes. And he's ready to do what God asks him to do. Is a pretty amazing thing. But it's not the beginning of Abraham's journey, is it? It's the end. He's already watched some things happen. He's already seen God at work in some places. And so one of the questions that I want to ask you this morning is, what are the roadblocks that you're facing in your journey? What's the darkness that you're walking through? What is the dark night of the soul for you? Or what's the wall that you're hitting? Because we're all there sometime. If you're not there now, you may be in the future. And if you're not there now, maybe you were in the past and you could point to a time when you really were at the wall and you weren't sure what was going to happen. And somehow God works that all out. What questions do you want to ask God at the wall? Right? What questions do you want to ask God? And what challenges does it cause in your ability to trust God? This needs to be a place of authenticity. But what we see about Abraham's life is that he journeys through the roadblocks and into deeper faith. And so he gets through it at every step along the way, even in his own mistakes and his own trials and the things that he could have done differently or better. He learns from it and he gets through the wall. Peter Scazzaro gives us this picture of the stages of faith, the stages that we go through in faith. And it starts here. There's a life-changing awareness of God, right? If we think about Abram's story, this is where it happens. When God says to Abram, get up and go to the country that I'm going to show you, suddenly there's a life-changing awareness of God and God's presence in his life, asking him to go into a land he's not aware of. He doesn't know where it's going to be, but he just says, go, and I will show you. There's this moment where he comes into a faith relationship with God. God calls him, and he follows. Stage number 2 is discipleship. This is a process of learning. This is the process of getting to know God. Who is he and how does this work? And it's the process of beginning to be shaped. Stage number 3 is the active life, where we take what we know about God and we engage in ministry. We start to serve in some way. We start to give back to the kingdom. And then Scazzaro says that's when we hit the wall. Often it's when we get to this place where we've come into a life-changing awareness of God, we've been growing in our faith a little bit, we've started serving, and then we hit something that just causes us to say, really? I don't even know what this is about. How could I be here? Why am I here? God, where are you? He goes silent. He doesn't seem to be engaged with what's going on. And it's here that we should take the journey inward, but often we don't. Here's where we go back to the beginning. Often we get stuck at the wall, and then we go along and we just kind of warble along until suddenly we have this new awareness of God. Maybe he shows himself to us again, and we go back through the process of 1, 2, and 3. Like we learn a little bit more about how to follow Jesus, and then we get busier. And sometimes we just get to the wall and we just get busy. We just think, I just got to work harder, faster. I'm going to do more for the kingdom. I feel empty inside. I feel like God's not listening. He's not attentive. Maybe if I just get busier, that'll fill up the hole I have. And for many of us, that's how we fill the holes in our lives. We just get busy. And it doesn't even have to be in our relationship with God. It can just be in life, right? Just get busy. One of my friends that I was with this last week, he's just a little older than me, a couple years, I think. And he was diagnosed 2 years ago with multiple sclerosis. And he's an outdoorsy guy, really outdoorsy. I mean, rock climber, fisherman, all that sort of stuff. And so he's just got all these compounding health problems that he's struggling with this disease. And he says, there's just some days I just have to not think about it. I just go climbing or I just go fishing. I just have to not think about it. And some of us treat our whole lives that way. When things get really hard, rather than becoming reflective, we just get busier. We just fill up our life and our space, and we just get on with the next thing, and we don't learn what it is that we're supposed to learn at this point. And what we're supposed to do at this point is go inward. Let's begin to ask ourselves. That's the inward journey. God, what are we learning? God, what do you want to teach me in this? You see, a lot of times when we get to the wall, we don't want to know. We just want to get out of it. Maybe you think about this as the desert. You get in the desert, you want out. Right? I was reminded last week, somebody said, I don't remember who it is, I think it's a country western song, but it says this. It's not bad theology, actually. If you find yourself in hell, keep going. Don't stop, right? But we do sometimes find ourselves in these dark places, and what we think we need to do is just get busier and just keep going faster, rather than taking a step back and saying, God, what do you have for me in this? And then there's the journey outward from the inner life. When we understand what God has for us in this season, now we can journey forward, right? We can journey into greater awareness. We can journey into transformed life and transformed love because we've learned what we needed to learn in that dark night, at that wall, in that desert. But the danger is when we get to this place is to stop and just go either, okay, I'm going to quit, or just get busier, or something to fill the empty space. And so those are some of the dangers that we face in the midst of it. Giving up, just going back, just quitting, or staying busy, getting more active. Or sometimes in these dark nights, sometimes in these challenging moments, we try to short circuit what God might want to do and fix it ourselves. How often have we tried to fix something ourselves and just made it worse? We were just going to fix this, and maybe you said something bad, and then you were trying to fix it and you said something else, and it would have been way better to stop at the first thing you said, right? You can't dig yourself out of a hole, they say. You can only dig deeper. There's times when we just keep going deeper, and we're just going to get busier and try to sort it out ourselves. And that's what Abram and Sarah try to do. They try to figure out how to sort out God's giving them a son by going through Hagar. But that wasn't God's plan. And so we get to these moments, we get to these places in the wall where we begin to ask ourselves the question, how did I get here? And those are real questions. How did I get here? And where am I going from here? We were talking last week at our leadership retreat, and I was sharing with our leadership team, I believe Moses Lake Christian Church is functioning well when we are an authentic, engaged, and life-giving community. That's who we're called to be. We're called to be authentic, we're called to be engaged and engaging, and we're called to be a life-giving community of people. And when we really need each other? It's when we're at the wall. Often we get to the wall and we run. But when we get to the wall, it's when we should go deeper and start to begin to ask, whether it's asking God questions, maybe asking other people questions. And one of the most important things that can be in place if we're going to be an authentic community is that people have the freedom to ask questions. How often people have questions about their relationship with God and they don't feel like they can ask them because it'll look like they don't have faith anymore. And people even say that. You're not supposed to doubt, just have faith, buck up. God's going to show up. All things work together for good. All this, all things work together for good is true. God said this to us. We know it is, but we don't give people the freedom to really process what's going on. One of the things that they do in their work with these folk, in the work that they do at rescue shelters, whether it's men or it's women or whatever, is they do a thing called self-evaluation. And what self-evaluation is when you find that you've committed a sin, or you haven't been paying attention to your program, whatever that means for you, or you've mistreated someone, you have to have a self-evaluation. You've responded in a way that wasn't appropriate, you have to have a self-evaluation. You can decide to self-evaluate, or one of the leaders can ask you to self-evaluate, or another person in the community can ask you to self-evaluate. And that happened a few times while we were there. We actually got to be a part of that. But often in that process of evaluation, we're asking the questions that we're really struggling with. These are the questions we hit at the wall. And I can't imagine that at multiple points along the way, Abraham doesn't say, God, what are you doing? Where are you? Why are you not showing up? You made this promise to me, and now it's not happening. Joseph had to have asked that question. In my view, he had to have asked that question when he was thrown in the pit, when he was sold to slave owners, when he was sold on, when he ended up in prison, right? Those were the walls in Joseph's life. There are moments when Joseph is saying, I don't get any of this. Like, I've been faithful, I'm a good lad, I've been doing what you told me to do, and it's all fallen apart, and here I am. And I think one of the disservices we've done in the culture in selling the gospel is we're selling a product that's not the actual product. We sometimes communicate that, hey, I know your life's rough right now, but boy, if you just accept Jesus, it's all going to get better. And we do know that coming into a life of Christ is coming into the best life available. But we also, most of us know that just saying yes to Jesus doesn't make all our problems go away. And so it's like if you go to buy a car, and you go to buy the car and you say to the person, what do you think of is the car a good car? It's a great car. It's a great car. I've never had any troubles with the car at all. You get in it seems like it's okay. And does it run well? It starts every morning, and it's just a brilliant car. I just don't need it anymore. I'm moving on, and it's a good thing. The transmission's great. The engine runs fine. And you're like, hey, this is the deal of the century. And you buy the car, and 3 days into it, you turn on the heater, and it smells like a cat. Right? It's like, oh, there's been a cat living under the dash of this car, and then the transmission starts to grind a little bit, and then it's not quite working, and the defroster doesn't work in the back window, and it starts to run rough, and all of a sudden you're looking around and go, what's the deal here? You told me this is the greatest car in the world, and now it turns out it's not the greatest car in the world. Sometimes we sell the wrong gospel, which is that everything's going to get all better and it's going to change. And that's not the experience that almost anyone has. And so we get to these places in the wall, and those are honest places. These roadblocks. Richard Foster describes this as the dark night of the soul. This is what he says about it. He says, when God lovingly draws us into a dark night of the soul, there's often a temptation to seek release from it and to blame everyone and everything for our inner dullness. Somebody else's fault. This is a serious mistake. Recognize the dark night for what it is. Be grateful that God is lovingly drawing you away from every distraction so that you can see him clearly. Rather than chafing and fighting, become still and wait. This is a challenging concept. And I will tell you that this is not my best thing. One of the things that's been helpful, though, is I've been working with these guys a little bit in this rescue shelter work, and this last week as I started this program for spiritual direction, is that instead of getting busier, to take a step back and just say, okay, God, what do you want to teach me in this moment? A couple of weeks ago, it was just just to be frank, I just had an awful week. Just an awful week. I woke up sad every day. I just woke up sad. And I know some of you experienced that, and it went on for a week. Every day I woke up, I just had to drag myself out of bed. I just didn't want to get out of bed. I just didn't want to do anything. I just was sad. That's the only way I can describe it. I was just sad. But because of some of this stuff that I've been thinking about, instead of just trying to ramp up the energy, trying to run ahead to the next thing, I began to just soak back in God and just say, God, what do you want to teach me in this moment? And what is it why am I don't even know why. Why am I feeling this way? What are the emotions that I'm feeling right now, and why are they? And what can I do with them? And what do you want me to do with them? And what's the next thing that you have for me? Why am I in this place? Why am I waking up? My life is good. I have a good job, and my family's healthy, and I have a granddaughter, and it's good. I'm excited. Why am I feeling sad? But it was a moment to take a step back. Rather than to charge ahead into the next thing and try to sort my life out, I kind of took a step back. And that's important to do sometimes. So what can we learn from these dark nights, from these roadblocks? What are the things that we can learn if we can pay attention to God? Well, one of the things is increased self-awareness. Right? What's going on with you? What God's doing with this often in these dark nights is he's stripping away the stuff that makes us comfortable. And so he's asking us to consider what's going on inside of us. That's the most important question I think we can ask in these moments. God, what's going on inside of me? And why am I having this emotion? Why am I feeling this? And so going through a dark night, being in a desert, it can increase awareness. It can increase self-awareness. Then we can share honestly. Right? We can learn in these dark nights that there are people we can go to and say, I don't get this. I don't know what God's doing. I don't know what he's up to. It makes no sense to me. Part of the journey that I'm on right now in this spiritual direction thing is to learn how to better walk with people in these moments. To be able to ask good questions. To be able to help as people walk through challenging things in life circumstances that are hard. But we can learn to share honestly in these moments. We can be authentic with each other if we can be trusted. Like some of that is us needing to be a trusted person, right? And we can grow out of causal thinking. This is a really challenging piece. How many times when something goes wrong in your life do you say, what did I do wrong? It tells you something about your theology, which is that you believe that when you're doing everything right, God's going to bless you, and when you're doing things wrong, God's going to somehow bunk you on the head. It's causal thinking. What did I do wrong that got me in this spot? And sometimes, there's a lot of times in our lives when we don't do anything wrong and things still go wrong. And so it can move us out of causal thinking. It can wean ourselves off of dependency on feelings. How often are you driven by your feelings? Look, I'm a deep feeler. Charlene is a very moderating influence on my life in such a good way. Like, I'm a much deeper feeler. That's how I do my life. She does her life differently. If we were both like me, there'd just be smoke rising from that neighborhood all the time. It's really good to get outside of that, right? Because there are days you wake up and you go, well, I don't feel saved. I don't feel loved. I don't feel accepted. And that's That's a place where we got to walk out of that spot. Not that we're not going to still be deep feelers, but what is God really? What about him do we really know to be true? What about us do we really know to be true? We find that if we're willing to go through the dark night of the soul, these roadblocks, we learn to endure. We learn to endure. Our son Noah has been playing soccer at a university over on the west side for 4 years. This is his 4th year. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done. It's been so hard to watch him. But I got to tell you, it's been a challenging environment. But watching him and talking to him now, just even talking to him on the phone last night on the way home, we went to one of his matches yesterday. He didn't play. Anyway, I was talking to him, and just to hear him say, you know what, Dad, I feel like I'm in a good spot. I've learned some things here, and I'm just gonna show up. And if I get a play, I'm gonna just go play. And if I don't get a play, then I'm gonna, sit on the bench and eat snacks. It's taught him to endure. He has learned way more from it than I have. I just kind of want to throw out to the coach. But you can't do that sort of a thing. That's not healthy for anyone. But he's learned through this process. And he believes it's been a process God has been driving. And so I can see that too. But we learn that stuff through our journey through the wall. The most dangerous thing we do is run off or quit or give up on what God's doing, or not even ask him what he's doing, or maybe try to short circuit it. But what waits on the other side of the wall? What waits over there? If we can get through the wall, what lays on the other side? What treasures are over there? Number one, there's a greater level of brokenness where we are able to enter better into the lives of others. Who are the people that are most able to share their lives with you and comfort you when you're in a challenging moment? Somebody who's been through that moment before you, right? When I was doing my little teaching bit at this rescue shelter, boy, I was really careful. I was really careful about what I said. And here's why. I have no context to understand what these ladies have been through in their life. I just don't. I had to be really careful in that spot. But other ladies who have been through that spot, who have been through the program, they could share. They've been there. They walked that out. Deeper brokenness in our lives allows us to better relate to other people who are going through the wall. So don't short circuit what God's doing in your life, because probably he's going to take your life and he's going to bless another life because of what you learned. So don't miss that. That's part of what's waiting on the other side of the wall. There's a greater appreciation for wholly unknowing. Think about Job's story. He's like this majorly wealthy guy, has all these blessings. It's incredible. And like overnight, all his kids die, all his wealth goes away, all of his animals quit. He's sitting in a pile of ashes. And he's saying, God, where are you? And his friends are asking the same question. Job, what did you do? But in the end, what God says to Job is, I'm bigger than all that. There's a mystery to me that you may not get. You don't get all the answers right now. You can't see that far. And there's some part of us that must understand that following God is not a formula. It's not like a religious, vending machine where as long as we put the right money in, we get the right thing out. That's not what it's like. That's never been the journey through history. And so we come to this place where we say, God, you know what? Yeah, I don't know I don't know how you put the stars in the sky. I don't know where all this stuff's going on around me. I don't know where the water comes or how it keeps going. I don't get all that you've done, but I'm going to trust you. There's a mystery to who you are. And in the midst of this journey, I'm going to trust you and learn to live with just a little bit of unknowing. A deeper ability to wait on God. Going through a wall breaks something deep in us, the driving, grasping, fearful self-will that we have to produce. It'd be interesting to you if sometime you could just hear God say to you, I actually don't need anything from you right now except for you to be here. That's all I need from you. I just need you to be present. I don't need you to produce anything. I don't need you to do anything. I don't need you to fix anything. A greater detachment from the world. Detachment is the great secret of inner peace. One of the things the main teacher at the Spiritual Direction Conference said last week is he said this, we want to come to a place of holy indifference. What did he mean by that? Where the stuff that we have and the things that we get to do doesn't make our lives what it is. Your life is more than what you have. Your life is more than what you do. And we have to grow in indifference to the things we have and the things we do, because our attachment needs to be on God only. He's bringing us in the dark night of the soul to this place of having lives fully attached to him and not anything else, not even our dreams. Abraham, what I'm looking for from you is to be fully engaged with me, even beyond trying to fulfill what I ask you to do. That's what the call is. A greater detachment from the world. And so this morning, let me just invite you to think about some things. First of all, where's God been calling you? What's been the journey that he's called you to, right? What's the journey you're on? And what are the roadblocks that you're running into as you're trying to follow? What are the questions that you have? What's one question that you would like to ask God facing this roadblock? Now, here's the caveat to the question. You have to stop and listen, right? Sometimes we question God just as a matter of questioning. We ask God, then we listen. Maybe we get other people that we trust and who are faithful that can help us journey through that. And what are the fears that are clear to you as you face the roadblock? And what's the next step for you? If you're at this moment of a wall, what's the next step for you? What's the next thing that God would call you to do? What's the next right thing? And then how can others walk with you and pray with you as you journey? You know, none of us are called to isolation, but sometimes it feels that way. And sometimes God gives us those moments of isolation because he wants to see what we're made of. Does that sound strange to you? Let me just illustrate it this way. If you have kids and your kids know how to ride a bike, there was a moment when you had to let go of the seat. Do you know what I'm saying? You don't know if a kid knows how to ride a bike till you actually let go of the seat. And sometimes God lets go of the seat. And he says, I want to see how you're going to respond, how you're going to live through this without hearing me every moment of the time. This is me setting you free to live. And I'm still here and I'm still present, but I want to see. Sometimes we just want to run in the garage and get the training wheels. This is about letting go. And so what about you? Where are you in this journey? We don't want to run from the dark nights. We don't want to run from the difficulties because it's in those places that God often teaches us the most. And when we get through them, he gives us a life that can be passed on.